Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm Tim Jones with the Department of Environmental Protection, also known as MassDEP. This is a public information session that is being recorded and conducted remotely in a Zoom webinar format. The recording will be posted on MassDEP's website. Some Spanish, Portuguese, and Cape Verdean translation services will be available from DEP staff and another assistant, or actually two other assistants, if needed. Those persons assisting with interpretation will now introduce themselves and ask if anyone needs interpretive services. We'll start first with Spanish, and then Portuguese, and then Cape Verdean.
Buenas tardes, soy Mili García Serrano, directora regional en MassDEP. Si hay alguien presente que necesite asistencia interpretativa en español, por favor use la función de levantar la mano en su pantalla y levante la mano ahora.
We'll wait a few minutes to see if someone raises their hand. Does anyone raise their hand, Tori?
No hands in the audience.
Okay. No one has indicated they will need Spanish interpretive assistance, and so now we will move to Isabella, who will ask in Portuguese. Isabella?
Boa noite, meu nome é Isabela, sou intérprete de português do Brasil também. Essa é uma função de informação pública que está sendo gravada e conduzida remotamente em formato de webinar Zoom. A gravação será publicada no site do MassDEP. Alguns serviços de tradução em espanhol e português, em crioulo cabo-verdiano, estarão disponíveis do pessoal do departamento, se necessário. As pessoas que auxiliam na interpretação agora poderão se apresentar e perguntarão se está necessário algum serviço de interpretação. Se alguém precisar de interpretação, estou disponível.
Thank you, Isabella. We'll wait a few minutes, or a minute. Tori, do you see anyone raising their hand?
Seeing no one. Oh, we have one hand in the audience now. Susan, are you raising your hand for Portuguese interpretation?
Oh, it appears someone has raised their hand for Portuguese interpretation, and so we will return to her after I give the remarks, introductory remarks in English. If you could let her know that, Isabella, I would appreciate it.
Vamos retornar para a pessoa que precisa de tradução para português depois que forem feitas as informações em inglês iniciais.
Thank you, Isabella. Okay, now we will turn to Zinilda to provide Cape Verdean, to provide the question in Cape Verdean. Zinilda?
Alô, sim, boa noite. Meu nome é Zanilda, intérprete de cabo-verdiano. Se tem alguém que está na lista de participantes que mestre assistência com tradução para cabo-verdiano, nós podemos utilizar a função de levantar a mão para o pessoal poder saber, mas nós também mestre de serviço de tradução. Por favor, utilize aquela função que está na tela e levanta a mão agora se você é mestre de serviço de tradução para cabo-verdiano.
Thank you, Zinilda. Tori, has anyone raised their hand?
No, I'm seeing no new hands.
Okay, so no one has raised their hand for Cape Verdean translation. No one raised their hand for Spanish, I should say interpretation, but somebody did raise their hand for Portuguese, and so I will go ahead and give the remaining introductory remarks in English, and then Isabella will provide those in Portuguese. As I said previously, this information session is being recorded and will be posted on MassDEP's website. The purpose of this session is to provide clarifying information about DEP's proposed Title V and watershed permit regulatory changes. Additional information can be found on DEP's website under the Title V webpage. And that has been sent out to all of you in the chat function, I believe. That link, and I believe another link for the FAQ document is being sent out to you. And I would highly encourage you to, after tonight, use those information sources. Please make good use of everyone's time. The purpose of this information session is to provide people with an opportunity to ask clarifying questions about the proposed regulatory changes. There will be 2 upcoming opportunities for people to provide their comments concerning the proposed regulatory changes. Those will be official public hearings. And those are the hearings scheduled for January 24th and 25th, 2023. Or you may submit comments in writing during the public comment period, which ends on January 30th, 2023 at dep.talks@mass.gov. Please include Title V and Watershed permit in the subject line. Tonight, we will provide more information on the proposed regulatory changes in 2 ways. First, we will give a brief presentation that provides an overview of the proposed regulations and addresses some frequently raised issues. Second, we will receive and respond to clarifying questions raised by you, the participants. We will call on remote participants who indicate they have questions by writing the question in the question and answer function on their screen. We will first call on elected and appointed officials, and then all other participants in the order their question is submitted. If we do not understand the question, we may ask you to clarify it, and we will unmute you to clarify it. If you need language interpretive assistance, the individuals who are helping with that this evening will do their best to understand and record your question, and we will follow up in writing with a response. Because someone indicated earlier they need Portuguese interpretive assistance, we will now provide Isabella will now provide my introductory remarks and ground rules in Portuguese. After that, I will begin the information session. Isabella?
Ok, como eu disse anteriormente, essa sessão de informação está sendo registrada e estará publicada no site da MassDEP. O objetivo dessa sessão é fornecer mais informações sobre o título 5 proposto pela DEP e as mudanças regulamentares da licença de bacia hidrográfica. Informações adicionais podem ser encontradas no site do DEP na página web do título 5. O link está disponível mass.gov/regulations 210 CMR 15.000 septic-systems-tile-5. Por favor, faça um bom uso do tempo de todos. O propósito dessa sessão de informação é fornecer às pessoas uma oportunidade de fazer perguntas sobre as mudanças regulatórias propostas. Haverá 2 próximas oportunidades para as pessoas fornecerem seus comentários sobre as mudanças regulatórias propostas. Essas são as audiências públicas oficiais programadas para 24 e 25 de janeiro de 2023. Ou você pode enviar comentário por escrito durante o período de comentários públicos, que termina em 30 de janeiro de 2023, no endereço de e-mail dep.talk@mass.gov. Por favor, inclua o título 5 e a licença de bacia hidrográfica na linha de assunto do e-mail. Hoje à noite, forneceremos mais informações sobre as mudanças regulamentares propostas de 2 maneiras. Primeiro, faremos uma breve apresentação que fornece uma visão geral das regulamentações propostas e aborda algumas questões frequentemente levantadas. Em segundo lugar, receberemos e responderemos às questões levantadas por vocês, participantes. Chamaremos os participantes remotos que indicarem que têm perguntas, escrevendo a pergunta na função Perguntas e Respostas em sua tela. Primeiro, chamaremos os funcionários eleitos e nomeados. Depois, os outros participantes na ordem em que a pergunta foi apresentada. Se não entendermos a pergunta, pedimos, por favor, que esclareça. Se você precisar de assistência interpretativa, como foi indicado mais cedo que havia uma pessoa, eu estarei ajudando com isso essa noite e farei o possível para entender e gravar a pergunta e depois dar seguimento por escrito com a resposta. Meu nome é Isabela, como eu disse, vou estar ajudando nas tradução, na interpretação e as regras básicas depois dessas regras básicas dadas pela introdução. Depois disso, iniciaremos a sessão de informação. Tendo concluído minhas observações introdutórias, e regras básicas, iniciaremos agora a sessão de informação.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank you. Okay, having concluded the introductory remarks and ground rules, we'll now begin the information session, turning first to Mary Beth Chubb, who will provide the introductory presentation. Mary Beth?
Thanks, Tim. Good evening, everyone. What I'm going to do is go through a brief overview of the proposed regulatory changes. Is everyone seeing those slides?
Yes.
Yes, Mary Beth, we can see them.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go through the proposed changes to Title V, 310 CMR 15, and also the new proposed watershed permitting regulations. There are more detailed presentations and recordings of those presentations available online. The webpage information has been put into the chat, and it will also be later on in this presentation. So what we're proposing to change in Title V is specific, to the nitrogen sensitive area provisions of Title V. Currently, Title V has drinking water protection nitrogen sensitive areas. These pertain to new construction in Zone 2s, interim wellhead protection areas, in areas that have both on-site septic systems and non-public drinking water supply wells. And for new construction, we impose loading restrictions of 440 gallons per day per acre. These provisions will be maintained in Title V. There is no proposal to change that requirement. What we are proposing is to establish a new designation that we are calling a natural resource area, NSA. This will apply to new construction and existing systems in areas that are designated as a natural resource area, NSA. And these are watersheds with nitrogen total maximum daily loads, or a scientific evaluation quantifying nitrogen impacts. And there will be two different types of designation, one of which is automatic, and the other is through a public notice process. So the first group, the automatic designation for the natural resource area NSAs, would happen upon promulgation of Title V. And this would apply to watersheds on Cape Cod that are subject to the Cape Cod 208 plan and currently have a nitrogen total maximum daily load. All Cape Cod communities are subject to the Cape 208 plan, which was approved by EPA in 2015. And there are currently 30 watersheds across 11 Cape Cod communities that have EPA-approved nitrogen TMDLs, or total maximum daily loads. So on this map, those areas are indicated by the darker green shade along Cape Cod. The second group of natural resource area NSAs are the ones that would be designated at a later time through a public process. And these include watersheds on the islands and along southeastern, south coastal Massachusetts. Some may have a TMDL, some may have a completed scientific evaluation, such as a Mass Estuaries Project report showing nitrogen impairment. Some of the other Cape watersheds that would have a TMDL developed after the Title V regulation, they would all be part of this group. And these areas may be designated through a public process after development of a TMDL or conclusion of a scientific evaluation that showed nitrogen impairment. So some of these areas are shown on this map in the teal color and the lighter green shade. So the requirement when an area is designated as a natural resource area, NSA, is a reduction in the nitrogen load. So for facilities that have septic systems serving new construction or an existing facility, they would be required to incorporate best available nitrogen reducing technology within 5 years of the effective date of that NSA designation. The alternative is if the community applies for and obtains and operates under a watershed permit. So again, the timing for implementing that requirement for the natural resource area NSA is dependent on the location of the watershed. The first group being those Cape communities with the nitrogen TMDL under a 208 plan, and those are automatically designated when the regulations are promulgated. And the second group being those off Cape that have a TMDL or on Cape and have a TMDL developed later, or any that complete the scientific evaluation or MEP report. Have an MEP report or complete a scientific evaluation. But those areas, the second group would go through a public process of being designated by DEP. And then that designation date would be the effective date. So the exemption from the individual system owner to upgrade to the best available nitrogen reducing technology is if the community applies for and obtains a watershed permit. If they operate under a watershed permit, then that Title V requirement to upgrade in 5 years would not apply to that individual system owner. Alternatively, if a community wanted to pursue a watershed permit, but was not quite ready to do so, it could submit a notice of intent within 18 months of designation of being in an NSA, and that would pause that 5-year installation requirement while they took steps to pursue the watershed permit. So this depicts the proposed regulations and how Title V and the watershed permit interact. The green boxes, the top layer, show the 30 watersheds on Cape Cod with an automatic NSA designation when the regulations are promulgated. That would start the 5-year time clock for the individual systems, unless the community filed a notice of intent within 18 months of the regs being promulgated, which would pause that 5-year time frame while they pursued a watershed permit. Or if the community was ready to do so, they could apply directly for and obtain the watershed permit. Similarly, but at a later time, the bottom group, that second group, the islands, South Shore, South Coast, or Cape communities that have yet to develop the TMDL, they would be designated through a public process. That designation date at the conclusion of the public process would start that 5-year time clock, unless the community filed a notice of intent saying they intended to pursue the watershed permit or applied directly for the watershed permit. So in addition to those changes to Title V, the watershed permit regulations DEP has put forth are a 20-year voluntary permit instead of the traditional 5-year permits. They're issued to local governments, regional governments, or could be issued to multiple local government units if they had an intermunicipal agreement. They provide the community the opportunity to employ a wide range of solutions to address their water quality needs, including alternative and innovative approaches. It utilizes an adaptive management approach that allows a community to test out an alternative and evaluate it, and then change it or modify their approach as needed so they can address their water quality impairments. And it's based on a town-approved watershed management plan. So the watershed management plan is a long-term plan to address an existing water quality impairment to restore and protect water quality. It can be a comprehensive or a targeted watershed plan. And the plan must be designed to reduce nitrogen loads by 100% within 20 years. And in the draft regulations, MassDEP may allow for at least a 75% load reduction and may determine an alternative schedule as appropriate based on watershed specific issues. So as Tim mentioned at the outset of the info session, we have a lot of information available for you online. The public hearings, which I'll go over those dates in a moment. We have at our MassDEP public hearings page, you can find out those dates and to register for the online public hearings. And then also on our Title V regulation page, 310 CMR 15, and also on our watershed permit proposed regulation page, 314 CMR 21. So the public hearing sessions and public information sessions, we extended our public comment period. We have this information session tonight. We have another one that is a hybrid session that offers both online and in person. It will be held at UMass Dartmouth, and that's at 6 p.m. And if you plan to attend tomorrow night's online, then you would need to register for that. And that can be done on the public hearing page. And then next week, we will have two remote-only public hearings, one on January 24th at 6 and one on January 25th at 6. And again, you can find those on those info pages on the public hearing page to register for that remote attendance. The comment period has been extended through January 30th until 5 p.m. And all comments submitted must include the name and contact information of the person providing those comments. You can submit comments by email to dep.talks@mass.gov. And please include Title V and watershed permit in the subject line. You may also mail comments to MassDEP Bureau of Water Resources, Division of Watershed Management. Please put attention Title V and watershed permit to 100 Cambridge Street, 9th floor, Boston, Mass. 02114. And then this is some information. We have the background document on the proposed regulations. We also have a nitrogen sensitive area online viewer where you can input your address and see if if your property would be located in a watershed and a nitrogen sensitive, potentially nitrogen sensitive area. There's also another map for the natural resource area, NSA map. And then frequently asked questions, which is available and being updated continually as we receive questions. And here is contact information and emails. You can send your questions to the DEP Talks address. You could also email any of us in both our Southeast Regional office and also in the Boston office. And I thank you for your attendance. So I'll send it back to you, Tim.
Great. Thank you, Mary Beth. Okay. We'll turn to the reason why you, the attendees and participants, are here, and that's to ask questions. And I want to be clear, we're here for an information session. It's not a public hearing where we receive comments, but it's an information session where we receive clarifying questions from you about the draft regulations and we provide clarifying responses for you about those draft regulations. Let's start first with, as we always do, and as I said at the outset, we'll start first with elected and appointed officials. If you have any questions at this point, we'll turn to you first. Please submit your questions in the question and answer box on your screen. Tori, am I seeing questions from elected and appointed officials on my window?
I believe all these questions were submitted before you asked for elected and appointed officials.
Okay. How about if we ask elected and appointed officials to raise their hand now if they have a question, and then we'll find their, or they could resubmit it now and that'll bring them to the top, right, Tori?
Correct. I think raising their hands would be the easiest option if possible.
Okay, so if you're an elected or an appointed official, please raise your hand now. And we'll ask you to submit your question in writing in the question and answer function. Are you seeing anyone, Tori?
I am not seeing anyone.
Okay. All right, well, it appears that there are no elected or appointed officials who have questions this evening, so we'll turn first to the persons who submitted questions, and we'll start with the person who submitted their question first, starting with Thomas, I believe it's Nuno, or Nuno, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but his question is, there are 30 watersheds in 11 communities. Will each community have only one watershed permit, possibly for more than one watershed? I assume it appears that he is referring to the Cape, the 30 watersheds on the Cape. I'm not certain of that. But Mary Beth, would you like to answer this first question?
Sure, and it's going to be dependent on the community and what their plan is moving forward. There is the option to have individual watershed permits, and DEP is also thinking on doing one watershed for one permit for multiple watersheds. So it really is dependent on the town and the town's plan.
Okay, thank you, Mary Beth. The second question is from Ms. Gloria Bancroft, and that is not a clarifying question about the regulations. It is what caused DEP to pursue these changes. And so we'll move on to the next question. The next question is from Gloria Bancroft, and her question is, nitrogen loads are not 100% caused by septics. What is DEP doing to address nitrogen loads from non-septic causes? Leldon, would you like to take that one on?
Sure. There are a variety of different methods for addressing nitrogen that come from sources other than wastewater, or let's say some sources of wastewater which are not related only to septic systems. So, for example, the city of New Bedford's contributions of nitrogen that come from combined sewer overflows have a long-term control plan. Agricultural sources may typically have best management practices that can be implemented. Typically, that is put in place either by the Natural Resource Conservation Service or by the Department of Agricultural Resources. Other sources of nitrogen may be from stormwater. So both federal and state agencies have requirements related to stormwater, much of which is intended to infiltrate water into the ground which helps to attenuate nitrogen. So it really depends on, the source of the nitrogen as to what the appropriate type of management practices or what type of regulations apply, or controls that one can put in place. So it's dependent upon what the source is, but there are a variety of different methods for trying to address nitrogen that come from other sources.
Does anybody have anything to add to that? No? Okay. All right, let's go to the next question. The next question is from Gloria Bancroft. She says designations will be determined through a public process. Please define public process. I can answer that question for you, Ms. Bancroft. The best way to define that is to direct, because it is a long definition. It's not actually a definition, it explains the public process and what would be involved in the public process. And the draft regulations that are on DEP's Title V webpage under, let's see, 310 CMR 15.2142 explains all the parts of the public process and what the requirements would be for DEP to hold the public process and go through that and then designate an area as a nitrogen sensitive area. I think that's the best way to answer your question because it is a detailed public process with a lot of different parts to it. Anybody else have anything to add to that before we move on? Okay. Let's see, Susan Catrayo has the next question. I am unclear why this nitrogen is a problem. Mary Beth, you want to tackle that question?
Sure. So what we're seeing in the estuaries and embayments is impacts from nitrogen. That's called eutrophication. Eutrophication robs the water body of oxygen. It causes algae blooms, which deplete that oxygen. It damages eelgrass beds, which are nurseries for fishes. It hurts the fish population, causing fish kills, and can also close shellfish beds. And it's becoming, it is and has been a problem that is getting worse continuously. And so these proposed regulations are to address the nitrogen loadings that are going to these estuaries and these embayments.
Anyone have anything else to add?
I just add two other things, Tim. One is that there are requirements of federal law that the state has to have its waters meet state water quality standards, and if our waters don't meet, or where our waters don't meet state water quality standards, then the state is obligated by federal law to address those types of problems. So there is there's a legal reason. And then just to supplement Mary Beth's answer about the algal blooms. Some of the algal blooms are toxic. They emit an odor, and those odors can actually be harmful to pets. And in very serious algal blooms, they can even be harmful to humans.
Thanks, Logan. And I'll add one thing too. In our prior public comment or public hearing sessions, which are recorded and online at the DEP webpage, a number of people, many people actually talked about the problem and why it is a problem, the excess nitrogen, and why it may cause fish kills and kill off other sea life, and why it's an environmental and an economic problem. And I would refer you to the webpage. Again, there's a lot of information on the webpage, the Title V webpage, about why this is both an environmental and an economic problem that has existed for a while. And so that is why we are addressing it at this point. I hope that answers your question, provides you with information. enough information.
Yeah, good comment, Tim. Thanks.
The next question is from Trish Dumman. She asks, how are these information and hearing sessions being publicized so affected homeowners are made aware? That's a really good question. They're all being recorded and they're all on our webpage. And this one will be recorded, is being recorded, as I mentioned earlier, and will be posted on our webpage. We have reached out to the communities with many emails and other messaging efforts to municipalities, to Board of Health leaders, to other representatives of communities, and asked that they share that with communities. I've read about this in multiple newspapers over the last few weeks about these information sessions occurring and the public hearings occurring. So the message is getting out there. But if you have any other advice, Ms. Dumman, on how we might better publicize it to homeowners so that they're better made aware of this, I would greatly appreciate it. This is our third public information session. We've had 3 public hearings, and we'll be holding one more information session tomorrow night at UMass Dartmouth, and then 2 more public hearings next week. So hopefully people are finding out about these information sessions and hearings.
And Tim, I'd just add that we also have contacted the non-governmental organizations who have an interest in water quality issues, asked them to inform their constituency. And the agency has also been in contact with legislators to make them aware of it so that they could help to publicize as well.
Great, thank you, Weldon. The next question is from Gloria Bancroft. And the question is this: in both options offered, the taxpayer is responsible for the cost ultimately. What other options were considered by DEP? I'm not understanding the question. What other options were considered by DEP?
Kim, I guess we might, one possible source might be, say, federal government or state government. And while we continue to work with legislators through the executive branch, we're part of the executive branch, to recommend that there be funding, that funding would come typically through the legislature, through the governor's office. And as far as federal sources, they've not offered, or there isn't funds available specifically for this issue, but there are federal funds that are available through statutes like the recently passed bipartisan infrastructure law and the other sort of COVID relief that is known as ARPA. And so both of those sources are providing funding to states, some of which will go into funds that are typically sought by municipalities to do wastewater and water supply infrastructure type planning. So those are a couple of other sources of funding that are available.
Great, thank you.
I would also like to offer that MassDEP continues to populate our webpage with regards to funding ideas. And many of these ideas are actually provided to MassDEP from municipalities that have sought out either outright grants, which means that there's no repayment on grants, or maybe there's a low fund match to the grant. And there, of course, are some low interest state revolving fund options. So predicated on the selection of the alternatives, MassDEP continues to work with the municipalities. And in the case of homeowners, there's a septic abatement program that I believe it's run by Barnstable. So we continue to populate our webpage to ensure that there is responsiveness with regards to available funding.
Thank you, Millie.
And I think we should
helpful.
say that if for some reason our responses don't answer the question that you had, please feel free to put a clarifying question back in the chat, back in the Q&A function, and we'll try to be clearer.
Thanks, Lona. Good point. The next question is from Gloria Bancroft. What happens if a community is found in non-compliance with the watershed permit? I'll answer that starting out and then let others chime in. What would happen is MassDEP would work very hard with the community to find out why there's non-compliance and help that community to come back into compliance. Anybody have anything else to add to that?
I guess I would add, there is an adaptive management component. So some of the nitrogen reduction targets that may be proposed, excuse me, that may be proposed in watershed permits would seek to hit certain, nitrogen reduction levels. And if a community didn't reach those levels, that wouldn't necessarily be considered non-compliance. And they may, modify their plan, and DEP would work with them to modify their plan to try and reach those goals. So there's kinds of two, there's strict sort of compliance enforcement, but there's also this type of adaptive management tool built into watershed permits to help reach the goals.
Thanks, Logan. Really good point. Thank you. Let's see. Linda Gallant has a clarifying question on the map. Upon looking at the NRA NSA map, are the areas in white not included in the new regulation? I don't recall what the areas in white were. Do you, Mary Beth?
I do, and I saw Linda's question, and I was actually just out looking at the map.
You didn't see any areas in white?
I didn't. So the watershed is the green, the colors that are in the key would be the watershed area that the property would be nearby, but I'm not sure what is meant by in white.
Linda, or is this from Linda? Yes, Linda, if you could submit a clarifying question, that would be great. The next question is from Michael DeLeo. His question is, this proposed regulation change will cause homeowners with private septic systems to incur an immediate cost of a very significant value. What rule allows a regulatory agency to make a regulation that will in fact cause an extreme cost to be immediately incurred by the residents without legislative approval? Mr. Dalio, your question is more of a legal question than a question that asks for clarification of the existing regulations. I will say, though, that the process that we are going through is firmly established in the law, and it's a long established process where agencies like DEP go through a rigorous public process to enact regulations like we're trying to do right now, which are in draft form right now. And then once they become final, if they become final, then have the force of law. So the process that we're going through is well established, and it's been established for quite some time. The public comment period closes on January 30th. And then after that, DEP then continues to consider all the comments in depth before moving forward with final issuance of the regulations. I hope that answers your question. Does anybody have anything to add to that?
Well, for the septic portion where MassDEP is availing itself again to long-established Title V regulation.
Right.
So we are not doing anything out of order with regards to Title V. That's the authority. What's new, it's the proposed watershed permit that is brand new, and that basically seeks to, as described by Mary Beth and others, to provide a broader adaptive management-based approach to resolving the nitrogen and other contaminants of concerns issues within the water column.
Thank you, Millie. And I'll add, by way of example, that this is this very same process, this process for drafting regulations, issuing them for public comment, and then going into final regulations. It's the very same process, not identical, obviously, but the same process that was that had to be gone through for the original enactment of the Title V regulations in the early 90s. And so now we are amending those regulations that were enacted in the early 90s. The next question comes from Trish Dumman. Her question is also, we do not understand why the regulations are focused on individuals in the communities and not focusing on requiring towns to have a holistic plan to resolve the nitrogen issues in their towns. Lalvin, would you like to answer that question?
Sure, I can take that one. So the department is exercising its authority under Title V because we know that we know that a good portion, depending upon the community, a portion of the nitrogen pollution is coming from wastewater sources, much of which is coming from septic systems. So we are taking that approach. And we are also offering the alternative approach of the watershed permit regulations, which kind of gets at the point that Ms. Dumman is raising about bringing in municipal plans. We're trying to encourage municipalities to develop those plans and put those in place so that they can take a more comprehensive and broader management strategy towards all the nitrogen sources, including those from wastewater sources in their towns.
Thank you, Lalvin. The next question is from Terry Daly. What is the problem statement? Why is this being raised now? We hear that the technology is not available at the individual owner level to remediate. If true, how are individual owners supposed to act? This question relates to the IA technology and clarification of the existing technology. Mary Beth, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. So currently there are 7 technologies with nitrogen removal with general use approval under the alternative system program. And those technologies have demonstrated performance down to 19. We also have 2 technologies that are in their performance testing evaluation that are looking to demonstrate 11 and 10 milligrams per liter, and a couple of technologies that have just started the process that are also looking to demonstrate 10 or less for nitrogen. And so the technologies are under development and they are coming along. And similar to when the alternative program began and we had the drinking water protection NSAs and those requirements, the technologies came to demonstrate being able to meet those loading limits and were developed. And we are seeing that now in terms of coming in to demonstrate even lower values of nitrogen. So there are technologies out there, and some of the technologies that now have general use at and demonstrated performance of 19 are also considering coming in to be reevaluated to demonstrate perhaps a better performance value.
Thanks, Mary Beth.
Would you mind if I just add a couple of things to
sure.
that? So one is, Mary Beth was speaking to the technology available at the individual owner level, which is, of course, the question that's being asked. But there is the other alternative, which is that the municipality, develops its watershed permit plan, its wastewater plan, management plan, and wastewater treatment at that level, at a municipal level, has typically been able to achieve, lower concentrations, better results than is currently available at the septic system level. So there is the ability through wastewater management to get to lower concentrations, greater load removal. And then we also kind of stepped over the first part of this person's question, which is, what is the problem statement? And problem statement is that we know that there is nitrogen pollution coming from a variety of sources. We know that from data that our agency and others have collected over the better part of 2 decades. We know we have identified where there are impaired waters, and in some of those we have total maximum daily loads. Some of those have mass estuaries reports, and some of those have other forms of scientific information that support our understanding that there is a problem. And as Mary Beth spoke to earlier in the presentation, that that nitrogen pollution is leading to a variety of water quality problems that impact the natural environment. In some instances, can impact human health, and can also impact the economics of people who are relying on clean water for fishing and other activities, both commercial and recreational.
Thank you, Logan. This is another question actually where I'm going to follow up and encourage Terry Daly and everyone else listen to please go to the MassDEP website. These were great answers you heard tonight, helpful answers, but on the DEP website, you can get a lot more information addressing your question. What is the problem? Why is it a problem? Why is it an environmental problem? Why is it an economic problem? There's an 11-page FAQ document that goes into detail about these issues that Terry Daly is raising. And I highly encourage you to go there. And there's also, as I said before, recorded information sessions there, recorded public hearings. There's a wealth of information there that I encourage people to go to. And as I said before, we will be supplementing the FAQ document either at the end of this week or the beginning of next week with more questions and answers that we get and that we want to respond to and put on our website to get more information out to people and be as helpful as we possibly can. All right, let's turn to the next question from Barrett Hurwitz. What criteria will DEP use to evaluate community watershed permits? How long is the process? Is there an appeal process from a DEP denial? The criteria that DEP will be evaluating to issue watershed permits are specified in detail. It would take all night, not all night, but it would take too long for me to explain it now. But it's in 314 CMR 21.05, the draft regulation that's on our website. That sets forth the criteria. In short, many communities have already undertaken processes to get a watershed permit. And those are either a comprehensive water management plan or a targeted watershed management plan. Those are two of the things we would be looking for in terms of getting a watershed permit, but they aren't necessary. If you do have those, they're very helpful. There may be some bits of information that they don't have that we will ask that you follow up and provide to get a watershed permit. But those would be helpful. But again, the community does not need those to get a permit. What it does need to get a permit is spelled out, as I said, in detail, very specifically in 314 CMR 21.05, the draft watershed permitting regulations on the website. How long is the process? How long the process is to get a permit? That's how I'm construing the question. It depends on the community, when the application is submitted, how much more follow-up needs to be done by the people reviewing the applications. Some communities are already far along and the process will not be long at all. Other communities have very simple watersheds. That process won't be long at all either. Even if they don't have a CWMP or a comprehensive water management plan or a targeted watershed management plan. So the answer to your question varies. Is there an appeal process from a DEP denial? Yes. The appeal process is set forth in the regulations I mentioned before, and the provision is 314 CMR 21.05. That sets forth the appeal process. Anybody else have anything to add to that answer?
I just want to say, by way of reference, MassDEP piloted the watershed permit concept back in starting 2015, and working hand in hand with the 4 municipalities that currently have in their possession a watershed permit. Those 4 communities are responding to the Pleasant Bay watershed on the Cape. That's Brewster, Harwich, Chatham, and Orleans. It took us approximately a year to get through organizing and assisting the municipalities for them to put together the necessary information to apply for this permit, put this permit in front of MassDEP for us to weigh in and comment. But I just want to also caveat the fact that this was really an extraordinary approach, and it was really in pilot stage, and MassDEP was working robustly with getting to more concrete parameters for the criteria that today we are rolling out as a proposed criteria. So we have learned a lot since 2015, and hopefully that body of knowledge and learning process will yield a shorter time frame for issuing a watershed permit upon placing the permit application in front of the permit reviewers.
Thank you, Millie. The next question is from Thomas Nuno. Could stormwater modeling be incorporated into the watershed management plans? Mary Beth, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. So, yes, so the idea of the watershed permit is that it's based on the comprehensive wastewater management, water management plan of the community in order to address the nitrogen sources in that community that are having impacts. And so, yes, it could be the stormwater management could be incorporated as part of that if it was part of the comprehensive plan of the community to address that.
And I would just add that total maximum daily loads where they exist typically do identify the portion of the nitrogen load that's coming from various sources, including stormwater, and that, you know, Mass Estuary Program reports would have also identified some portion coming from stormwater as well, likely.
Thank you, Logan. The next question is from Trish Dumman, and this question was previously asked and answered by somebody else. It was asked by somebody else, and the question is, this proposal will have a significant financial impact on individual property owners. How are you addressing this? It was asked and answered previously, so I'm going to move on to the next question, unless somebody wants to jump in, but it was asked and answered previously. And also, Trish, I would suggest that, again, I don't want to oversell it, but I would suggest you go to the webpage that we've put out there. It has a lot of information responding to your question. The next question is from Brian Dudley. Isn't a watershed permit supposed to address all sources of nitrogen and not focus solely on wastewater? Mary Beth, you want to respond to this one?
Yes, so the watershed permit, again, is based on a comprehensive plan, which is supposed to be looking at all the sources that are contributing in a community and how that community is going to address those sources of nitrogen with either conventional treatment or alternative treatment. So yes, based on the comprehensive plan, it should be addressing all of it under that plan, and then subsequently under the watershed permit.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Anyone else have anything to add? Okay. The next question I do not understand. I mean, I understand the gist of it, but I don't, I'm going to ask the person who submitted it to follow up. I would also ask that you, that we unmute you to clarify, but it's an anonymous attendee. So if you could follow up in writing with a clarifying question, I would appreciate that.
Tim, I thought of one thing that might be helpful here to this person's question, which is, so the total maximum daily loads identify portions of the nitrogen load that are controllable and those that are not controllable. So the portion that we're asking, municipalities to address is that part of the controllable load of nitrogen, that part that they have some method for controlling.
Okay. And the goal is as established in TMDLs and mass estuaries reports, the goal is to reduce the nitrogen that's necessary to be removed so that the water quality concentrations can be returned to where they need to be. It doesn't mean that all nitrogen in the watershed has to be removed. It means that nitrogen sufficient to bring it down to the concentration needs to be removed. Trish Duman asked another question. This is a good clarifying question. Trish Duman asks, how can you force individuals to upgrade their septic systems when a lot of property owners near the water coast do not have the land area to upgrade to this kind of system? So she's speaking about how would the regulations address an issue where somebody may not have sufficient land area to upgrade. Mary Beth?
So the upgrade of the system would follow current Title V requirements for an existing system to meet maximum feasible compliance. So you're complying with the code to the best of the ability at the site. So that would remain in place. And as systems are developed, there will be options, other options of alternative systems that could assist in the installation of those systems, being more flexible in terms of site restraints.
Great, thanks, Mary Beth. Anybody have anything else to add to that? Okay. All right, the next question is from Paul Velho, and it is nitrogen sensitive area, comma. These are set in 3 different colors. What is the difference between them? I assume that you're referring to the nitrogen sensitive area address lookup, which I now have open on my other screen. And so I'll answer your question. If you look at the Mr. Velho, if you look at the legend to the right of the map, it explains the different colors. So the dark green area on the map is the watershed with final total nitrogen TMDL, and these are all in the Cape, that MassDEP will automatically designate as natural resource area nitrogen sensitive areas upon promulgation. So that means that all these areas on the Cape that you see that are in dark green already have TMDLs, meaning that their estuaries or embayments with respect to those TMDLs have nitrogen impacts that exceed current standards, and that upon promulgation of the regulations, that area will automatically be designated as a nitrogen sensitive area, meaning that automatically upon promulgation for those areas on the Cape that are in dark green, they will be designated as nitrogen sensitive areas, meaning that the automatic upgrade requirement is immediately applicable unless the community files a notice of intent or applies for a watershed permit. The other colors are a lighter green, and that's a watershed with a final TMDL. that MassDEP may designate in the future as a natural resource nitrogen sensitive area. So that means there's an area that's light green on the Cape, and I think there are 1 or 2 areas in the South Coast with a light green color, meaning that those areas already have a TMDL, but upon promulgation of the regulations, they will not be designated as nitrogen sensitive areas. That may occur in the future after the detailed public process that's laid out, as we talked about before, in the Title V regulations. And then once that happens, in the future, that community would be a nitrogen sensitive area, that watershed would be a nitrogen sensitive area, and the Title V upgrade requirements would apply unless the community files a notice of intent or receives a watershed permit. The last category is the blue-green color, and that's an area that has what's called an MEP report, Mass Estuary Project Report. There is no TMDL, but the Mass Estuary Project Report analyzes the watershed in terms of how impaired or impacted, whether they are the water bodies, the embayments and the estuaries, and what the nitrogen sources are in that watershed. It analyzes all those nitrogen sources and tries to quantify those. Anybody have anything else to add to this answer? Gerard?
I actually think I do. That may address the comment we got earlier about the white areas.
Oh,
so
right.
I don't know if this is the map that person was looking at, and on Mary Beth's presentation, they were kind of light gray areas that may have looked white on the person's. Okay. And doesn't necessarily mean that down the road they won't be determined, those areas won't be determined to be nitrogen sensitive areas. In fact, in Mattapoisett and Marion, there's some areas that need some further study to determine whether or not they will be determined as nitrogen sensitive in the areas. There are areas that aren't green or dark green, light green, or kind of blue green. For instance, if you look at Westport, the northwest part of Westport is not green, and it's because it's outside of the basin that's contributing to the Westport River. And so wouldn't be subject to the permit because it's outside the basin that has the impact.
Great, very, very helpful, Gerard. Thank you, very helpful.
Anything that's a great point. I think MassDEP is trying to also use visual tools to illustrate the areas that basically we are looking at with regards to how these proposed regulations would apply. So we encourage everyone on this informational session to consult the map.
Yeah, and by the way, the map has the ability for you to input your address, hit enter, and find out whether you lie in one of those areas whether your property lies in one of those areas that we were talking about previously. The next question is from Steve Kramer. He says, I recall that your presentation indicated that the intent is to reduce the septic nitrogen load by 100% within 20 years. Can you explain this goal further, as available high efficiency septic systems can only reduce the load by 30 to 50% when they are properly maintained? Mary Beth, you want to respond to this question?
Sure. So to clarify, the 100% involves the comprehensive plan for the town. Their comprehensive plan needs to outline how they're going to address 100% of the nitrogen load, and that would apply to the watershed permit. This may, for some towns, the use of IA systems may be able to do that. For other towns, the use of IA systems alone may not be able to do that. So it's going to be community specific depending on nitrogen sources and depending on their plan and how they are going to approach using the technologies, combinations of technologies and other alternatives.
Yeah, and to further develop that, it's not an either or, yes, no. It could be a combination. So you could have some far-reaching areas where sewering is not available, but some septics may do the trick to get you to the goal. So, which is why the combination of alternatives, and the strategy may be, again, rely on both traditional or non-traditionals.
Oh, thank you, Millie. That's a very good clarifying point. And that actually leads very well into the next question, which is from Daryl Enos, I think. Can this be solved by getting rid of septic and connect to town sewer? Very good question. And the answer is yes, in some communities, maybe not in others. But that is a tool that communities can use as part of a watershed management permit. And that is a tool that we encourage communities to use, although it's not appropriate for all communities in all areas because there may be limitations. The area might be too not densely populated enough, and it might not be cost effective for that community to do it. But this is one of the tools that we strongly encourage communities to take advantage of under the watershed management permit.
Tim, and we're also hearing some communities using smaller package plans, or at least those being proposed. I believe there is such a proposal for Wellfleet in one part of near the downtown with the 95 housing project. So not necessarily a full-scale traditional wastewater treatment facility, but rather a small-scale package plant.
So they're employing more of a targeted approach at the nitrogen, where they can effectively and cost effectively address the nitrogen through a wastewater treatment plant and sewering. That's what they're doing, even though it's not an all-encompassing sort of plan, but it does address that specific area that's suited for sewering. Great, thanks,
Smaller
Millie.
scale. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, smaller scale. Thanks, Millie. The next question is from Jean McCormick. The first question is not a clarifying question. Well, it sort of is. The first question is, why were the local town boards of health not part of the review and development of the proposed new regulations? Public process means inclusion of all parties involved in the development of regulations. Mary Beth, can you clarify for us the public process that preceded the regulations?
Sure, and this is also available on our FAQ that's out on our webpage. So back in 2017, 2015, there was an executive order 562, and that required DEP to review all of its regulations. And in response to that executive order, we had 12 comments that we received that pertain to both Title V and groundwater discharges. And in response to that, we formed a stakeholder group to discuss those 12 comments received, one of which was pertaining to nitrogen sensitive area provisions of Title V. And that group started in 2017, and towards the end of 2019, we asked that group to, if anyone wanted to participate in the NSA nitrogen sensitive area subcommittee group, to speak and talk about specifically nitrogen sensitive areas in Title V. And so that NSA subcommittee met in 2020 and through 2022 to discuss the issue of nitrogen sensitive area and the provisions of Title V. On that original stakeholder group were representatives of some towns and also Board of Health organizations such as the Mass Municipal Association and the MHOA and MIHA. And I'm probably not remembering everyone, but are listed in the FAQs.
Mary Beth, you just froze on the last. I think the last part of your answer.
Sorry.
No, it's not your fault. I think the last part of your answer, you were talking about how the boards of health interests were represented on the original committee, and they were invited to participate in the subcommittee, correct?
Correct, yes. And so it's completely voluntary. Anyone who was on the stakeholder group could then, was invited to participate. And so the participants of both groups, the stakeholder group in 2017 and the subsequent NSA subcommittee, are in the FAQ document that's out on our website.
And as Mary Beth said just now and at the beginning, the FAQ document, I think, has 2 pages or a page and a half discussing the public process that preceded these regulations. So I encourage you to go to that document and look at that.
Tim, there's another part to that answer that
Sure.
I'd like to provide. So
Sure.
in addition, prior to the promulgation, prior to the placement of these regs into the public comment process, MassDEP met with all of the municipalities who would be affected by these regulations, other stakeholders, variety of different groups, home builders associations, real estate organizations, and so on. We met more than 45 meetings we had, and that those, we were explaining what the regs were intended to do and what we were, and we did get feedback during that process prior to issuing these regs for public comment. This process that we're in now, the public information sessions and the public hearings, are part of the public process. And so boards of health have already submitted comments to us, and they continue to submit comments to us. And that is how we are getting, additional input from boards of health.
Thanks, Logan, for the clarification. I would add too that over the summer, this past summer, beginning in June, we met specifically with several representatives of the area boards of health, the groups and associations we met with. And as Leldon said, we met with every single community that would be affected, I think with the exception, that might be affected with the exception of 2, I believe, who declined to meet with us. All right, let's turn to the next question. The next question from Jean McCormick is, I understand the problem, but the regulation is only addressing one part of the contributor of nitrogen. Why is this not a holistic approach to address all contributors? Weldon, you want to take that question on?
Well, I would say that both TMDLs and MEP reports identify, various sources of nitrogen, and that the watershed permit is the method by which we're sort of encouraging municipalities to try and address all the sources of nitrogen that are controllable.
Thanks, Weldon. Anything to add, Mary Beth? Or anybody else? Billy? Gerard? Okay. All right, we'll go to the next question from Jean McCormick. Based on the desired decrease, the small percentage of septic contribution may not address the issue. How confident are you that this will, quote, fix the issue since there are larger contributors, wetlands, farms, composting, which DEP endorses, and runoff? Well, the answer to that is it depends from community to community. The Cape, for example, is quite different from sources of nitrogen for the most part. I'm generalizing, but for the most part, from the South Coast in terms of sources of nitrogen. And it's also quite different from the South Coast, generally speaking, again, in terms of the soils and other factors. And so the regulations are designed to be flexible and to take into account those differences among the communities. And the watershed permit approach would enable a community to design an approach that is best suited for that community. And so, for example, if if it has a substantial contributor of nitrogen that's different from other communities, that community can obtain a watershed permit to address that different source of nitrogen. Anybody have anything to add to that?
Just a couple of small things. So
Sure.
In the list of contributors here, wetlands is one of the examples of a source of nitrogen that DP would not consider controllable. I mean, the questioner is certainly right in the sense that, leaf litter decomposing provides nitrogen and so on. So that there are sources that you can't control, but there are sources like farms, composting areas, and so on that can be controlled. Those are typically controlled through best management practices at those types of facilities. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but to make sure that answer gets heard is that, there are other regulations, other agencies, and so on, and DEP members of this group are also working on those kinds of issues with other agencies or others reaching out and trying to make sure that those types of nitrogen controls are also being put in place. And of course, the watershed permit provides a vehicle for the towns to address that as well.
Thanks, Logan. The next question is from Thomas Nuno. He says, clearly MassDEP wants the communities to develop these plans. I assume he's referring to a watershed management plan and a permit that would follow from that. How can the residents encourage their communities to participate in this way? Well, I would just say, educate yourself with our website and speak with the leaders in your community. That's my response. Anybody have anything to add to that?
I expect that many of the municipalities will place this issue on their agenda items. So I would suggest monitoring boards of health agendas and boards of selectmen agendas, and to make sure that you could participate in the public processes that those municipal boards would offer as well.
Yeah, for sure. Public process is something that MassDEP highly values, and in working with municipalities, especially if they decide to move forward with a watershed permit strategy. Watersheds have no boundaries. So in other words, we may have watersheds that affect 1, 2, 3 more communities, and often the contributions are not equal per se. If you have 3 communities, the load might not be exactly the same. Therefore, communities are entering into IMAs, intermunicipal agreements, to better understand whose responsibility is it for X amount of load. And that dialogue and conversation often leads to community public involvement, public information sessions, which in the past and present and foreseeable future, MassDEP continues to support and provide support to the communities so that we can meld together the science, the finances, and the policies and regulations in a way that strikes the correct balance towards the goals. So we look forward to meeting with cities and towns. Please look at the map, and as Tim explained, educate yourself, and continue to provide us with comments so we can have that fruitful outreach and communication, and demystify any areas or points that may have been lost in the translation during the public process. We want to get it right.
Thanks, Millie. The next question is from Gerald Bellistock. He says, I know pollution has been an increasingly serious problem on the Cape, and remedial action is long overdue. But has there been careful consideration of incremental solutions? I can imagine dealing with the worst cases first, but I can also imagine that this might increase costs or extend the overall process excessively. But I'd like to hear your response. Mary Beth?
So to some extent, I think we have done a bit of incremental solution, looking at Cape Cod with the Cape Cod 208 plan, and they are further along in their development of their comprehensive plans and in moving forward. And so they are the first group to be designated. So that is somewhat of an incremental solution. But it is difficult because this problem has been going on for a long time, 25 to 30 years. It has been building up. and getting worse. So in that respect, we want to move forward with solutions in as expedient a manner as we can, but with consideration to how far along communities are in their planning.
Yeah, I would add too. It's an interesting question. This is one of the reasons why we give communities an option of a watershed permit, because communities vary so much from community to community, and the idea of addressing the worst cases first is an interesting point. But that is best made and determined and implemented by the community itself because of the variation among communities. So that's why we provide, one of the reasons why we provide that alternative to the communities, so that you can tailor the permit and the solution to the problem to the needs of the community. The next question is from Stephen Fernandez, and he's wondering if there's been any, quote, true research of the new alternative septic options. Mary Beth?
So Stephen, I hope this answers your question. So Massachusetts has a rigorous alternative system testing process and approval process. And it's a 3-level process where a technology would come in, it goes through piloting, which is an installation of up to 15 systems in 18 months of operation, and to demonstrate the performance and that it can actually physically be in New England and survive our winter. And then it moves, if it is successful there, it would move into the rigorous testing phase of the provisional use, which is a minimum of systems and 3 years. And then if they are successful in demonstrating their performance in that under the provisional use, then they would attain general use approval and be considered equivalent or enhanced, equivalent to a conventional septic system, or enhanced in removal of a nutrient such as nitrogen or phosphorus. I hope that answers your question. If it does not, please add something to the Q&A.
Thanks, Mary Beth. The next question is from Trish Dumman. Are all the towns on the Cape working toward a watershed permit, so homeowners in this area are not required to upgrade their system? I'll take a first stab at the answer, and the answer is no, not all towns on the Cape are working towards watershed permit. But our understanding from reaching out to the towns over this past summer and communicating with all the towns on the Cape this past summer is that many are, and many actually already have started working pretty aggressively towards this problem, and therefore already have a comprehensive water management plan or target watershed management plan, which puts into place the sort of the foundation that one would need for a watershed permit. And they're already doing work according to those plans. And so the answer to your question is yes, several, or not, you said all towns, but many towns are working in that direction. And we anticipate they will do that, and will seek a watershed permit. Anything else anybody wants to add to that? Okay.
I'm sorry, Tim. I think
Yeah.
the other thing that I would add is that Cape Cod Commission is also part of the mix with regards to providing assistance, and there is a consistency process that is part of evaluating the plans for each Cape community and islands. So all these organizations, DEP, municipalities, and their consultants, Cape Cod Commission, continue to press on to explore the possibilities under watershed permitting.
Thanks, Millie. The next question is from an anonymous attendee, and I don't understand the question. Could there be a conflict in federal funding support related to executive order restricting funding to areas outside 500-year flood zones? This is not a question that is a clarifying question of the regulations. I would encourage the anonymous attendee who submitted this to resubmit a clarifying question that pertains to the regulations themselves and a question that seeks to clarify the regulations. The next question is from Robert A. Johnson. He says, the nitrogen reduction targets I have heard seem somewhat arbitrary. TMDL in quotes, 440 GPD per acre, best available technology, 100% reduction, etc. Mr. Johnson, I'm having a hard time understanding your question. I'll ask folks on the panel, though. Do you understand the question and you want to answer it?
I'll just add, if you continue, Mr. Johnson has a second part and a third part.
Oh, I see.
So,
I see
yeah,
that.
so
He
maybe
says,
that will.
Yeah, he says, are there any limits which would have biological significance, such as concentration of nitrogen expressed as nitrate and nitrite? Or in the next question, or consider alternative control measures such as flushing of estuaries and embayments?
I think the challenge with the question is that it feels as though it's a hypothetical scenario. Maybe my colleagues can weigh in differently, but I can definitely tell you that we strive to work with real scenarios, municipality across the board, just taking into consideration the very specific sources as we understand them based on mass estuaries reports or like MEP reports. Once we have a better handle on the sources, then we start developing that conversation with regards to what are the customized approaches that will hopefully meet the mark with regards to effective reductions. So I apologize, Mr. Johnson. I was looking to strive to answer your question, but specifically on considering alternative control measures such as flushing and embayments, we do have a little bit of experience working, I believe, with Brewster. Gerard Martin has been those meetings, I believe, Route 6, and looking to explore the possibilities of inlet widenings, etc., so we can have higher flushing rate and less nitrogen. So I don't know, Gerard, if you have anything else to offer. We do have some of those projects that are currently on the pipeline.
No, I think you hit on it fairly well. They help projects like that.
And
No,
I would add go ahead, Logan.
I'm sorry. Project that I believe is in the town of Chatham, that's right around the Orleans line, is Muddy Creek, where the enlargement of the tidal inlet that over which I think that's Route 28 goes, was undertaken. That enlargement was undertaken several years ago, and did increase flushing of that embankment. So that is one example. There are other examples where that's an approach that's being taken. And then I also wanted to speak to the issue of the question of regarding biological significance. So the TMDLs, or the water quality standards, really are set to address all the designated uses. So that includes aquatic life as well as human health and other designated uses in the Commonwealth. So, the levels of nitrogen that are identified in those TMDLs are intended specifically to get, to a level of water quality that would protect all the designated uses.
Yeah, I was going to add a little bit more onto that. Good response, Alden. Thank you. In terms of your first question, the targets seem arbitrary. Far from arbitrary. In fact, before DEP can do anything in terms of designating a nitrogen-sensitive area, there's already been an extensive scientific evaluation, either through a TMDL, a mass estuaries project, or what's now referred to as a scientific evaluation in the draft regulations, studying that watershed, identifying, first of all, whether the embayment or estuary is impaired for nitrogen, meaning whether there's too much nitrogen that is impacting the ecosystem there and harming the water quality. And then another component of those analyses is identifying the sources of that problem, the nitrogen sources of that problem. And then lastly, determining how much of those nitrogen sources needs to be reduced in order to make that water or reach a healthy level of concentration of nitrogen in that water. So I would suggest, far from arbitrary, there's a very extensive scientific approach that leads up to that in determining how much nitrogen needs to be reduced to return those waters to healthy state. Okay. Let's go down to the next question from Linda Gallant. She's asking a question again about the map. Or I shouldn't say again, because I don't know if she asked one previously, but other people did. And this is good. I'm glad that people are asking questions about the map. It's good that people are using it and looking at it. There are different shades of green areas on the map. The darkest green area is along the southern part of Cape Cod. There are other areas that lack color. An example would be Rochester, Mattapoisett, Marion, and parts of Fairhaven. Are those exempt? This is a very similar question to what we had before. So it's a good clarifying question that you're raising. Who would like to answer this? Mary Beth or Leldon, would you like to tackle this question?
Yeah, either one. I think I can't see Mary Beth right now, so I will try. The areas that are shown in color in the green and the teal and then the dark green that are over on the Cape, all those are watershed boundaries. And so the areas outside of those colored watershed boundaries are not contributing nitrogen to any of these, to any of these impaired embayments. I believe that's the right answer to the question. Unless Mary Beth or somebody else can clarify anything I said.
Well, the other reason why, I think Mary Beth is frozen. The other reason why they may not have a color is either they have not been studied yet, there has not been a TMDL performed, a scientific evaluation performed, or an MEP report done for that area. And so it's unknown what the water quality is in the embayments for those watersheds. It may also be the case that they have been studied and determined not to have a problem.
That's correct. The latter scenario that you point to, Tim, for example, Gosnold, that's one area that's been looked at and determined that at this moment in time, there's no need for moving forward. So I think the best suggestion would be to check with MassDEP staff, further explore the map. We're happy to answer any questions. And there's clearly a workload of scientific studies in progress just to ensure that there's a bit more exact response to areas where at this moment seem like they're either in blank, and it's either because it's in progress or they have not been studied or they have been studied. So I think for MassDEP seems like further clarification of those areas, quote, the white areas would be our next step to further resolve this question, which is a great question.
Yeah, I agree. We can provide, it's a good question. Thank you very much for asking these questions about the map. We can provide further clarification. And by way of example, I was just looking at it. So for example, the area where Provincetown is, that appears in the natural landscape color because Provincetown has for years been aggressively tackling the nitrogen problem with a long-term plan that has, and Provincetown is also has the advantage of being a densely populated area. And so they've been addressing it for years through aggressive sewering of that area to address the nitrogen problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I go back to for those that have questions, contact us so we can talk specifically about your community, your area of interest, and as Tim noted, entering your address or address of interest may give you a little bit more information on the map viewer.
Great, thanks, Millie, and thank you, Tori, for showing the map. That was helpful. Okay, let's see. The next question is from Robert A. Johnson. He says, does industry and housing developments also have requirements, or are these part of local municipality controls?
I can definitely offer
Bill,
that.
you want to
boards of
answer this
health-
question?
Yep, boards of health, when you have a housing development, it goes through a lot of local scrutiny and local permitting. Also, if it hits some sort of Massachusetts environmental, the MEPA Act triggers, that may lead to some MassDEP or other agencies to weigh in and comment as to whether other state permits are needed. So there are connections throughout to ensure that there's dialogue around the issue of nitrogen and wastewater.
Okay, thanks, Millie. Anything to add? Anybody else? Okay, all right. Oh, and then he says, where could I find this information? I would refer you to the Title V page that we've been sending people to all night that has information pertinent to this question. Steve Fernandez asks next, it is my understanding that if you have a Title V system, you will need to upgrade again to a new alternative system. How do we know this new system will actually be effective? Studies, research? Mary Beth?
So just to clarify, the upgrade requirement is if you are in a designated natural resource area, NSA, within 5 years of that designation, unless the community gets a watershed permit. And there is a provision in the draft regulations that if the system was installed, a nitrogen enhanced system was installed within 1 year, correct me if I'm wrong, Tim.
That's correct.
You would not have to upgrade to a newer system for nitrogen removal. These systems, as I spoke to a little earlier, go through an approval and performance evaluation process by DEP, which is fairly rigorous, a 3-tiered process of piloting and then provisional, which is the 3-year evaluation of the system's performance before it achieves general use certification. So hopefully that addresses that person's question.
Thanks, Mary Beth. The next question is from Jean McCormick. She says, Dartmouth data says 14% is coming from septic systems. This is not the majority in our town, but you are applying a one-size-fits-all approach. Having a regulation with no required IA reduction number leaves an open-ended requirement. How are the towns expected to enforce it? I would first respond to say this is not a one-size-fits-all approach by any means. As we've explained before and in the FAQ document, the regulations are designed to be flexible. And so if the IA upgrade requirement is not suitable to a particular community because of this sort of issue that Ms. McCormick is raising, then the watershed permit approach is the approach to take. Because the community can then tailor the approach to the watershed permit to tackle the most significant nitrogen sources in its community. And the towns are under Title V required to enforce Title V requirements. That was another part of your question, with assistance by DEP if necessary. Anybody want to follow up on that answer?
I do want to speak to the 14% just for a moment, because I'm not sure where that particular number is coming from, but in the Slocum's River and Little River TMDL, the percentage coming from the Slocum's, the percentage attributed to septic is 23%. And it's noted there that the Little River portion of that watershed has very little contribution. So almost entirely it's coming from the Slocum's River portion of that watershed. So, you know, these percentages and numbers, you know, we talk about them and we use examples and so forth. But you really have to read those details of each report to understand what the contributing load is coming from septic in any given watershed or any portion of that watershed. Thanks.
Thanks, Logan. The next question is from Trish Dumman. Isn't it true that the new upgraded system you are proposing requires an annual maintenance and cost? Mary Beth?
Yes, so alternative systems, depending on the alternative system and its level of approval, they do require monitoring, and they do require oversight, operator oversight. So there is cost associated with the operation and maintenance of the system. For general use certified systems, it would be an annual requirement for monitoring and inspection, and then it would be more frequent depending on the system under provisional or piloting.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Let's see. Peter Spawn has the next question. He says, can you give me a ballpark cost range for average homeowner when individual system required at home? Mary Beth?
So range of costs for the two different technologies that are currently at provisional level for installation, the range is from $15,000 to $35,000, depending on the site and the system and condition of the current system if it's existing.
Thanks, Mary Beth. The next question is from Terry Daly. I don't understand this question. Maybe somebody else does. Clarifying question 19, 11, 10. What is the minimum target metric that must be met with remediation? Oh, I think I understand this question. Mary Beth?
So Terry, I believe you're referring to the 19 comes from the existing approved for general use nitrogen removal systems that have demonstrated the ability to meet 19 milligrams per liter, which again, that number was driven by drinking water protection purposes. And so we have technologies now that are under review, and they're looking to demonstrate that they can meet or demonstrate a performance of 10 milligrams per liter or 11 milligrams per liter. And so technology is going to improve, and as time goes on, there will be more technologies and different levels. And so that's why we have the term best available nitrogen reducing technology. So the idea is that you want to use the best available, the one that has the best performance value. If you have to upgrade your system upon being designated, then it would be what is available to you at that time with the best performance number.
And then Mary Beth, the next question is similar. Where is information available about the various technologies Mary Beth mentioned for individual homeowner level? Also, Mary Beth mentioned some quantitative performance numbers, but didn't define the numbers. I think you just did that. Do you want to just provide any additional clarifying information, Mary Beth?
So all of the technologies that currently have approvals at their various levels, general, provisional, and piloting, are available out on our alternative system webpage. And if Tori can't find that, I can send that and we can put that out, that information out to people. But if you were to search mass.gov for Title V IA system, you would be sent to this webpage where the technologies are listed, and then their individual approvals are also available on that page. And yes, the numbers are the performance that the technology has demonstrated through the approval process with DEP. So again, for those existing under general use, for nitrogen removal, they have demonstrated the ability to meet 19 milligrams per liter. And we currently have 2 technologies in, in the provisional level that are in the process of demonstrating meeting 11 milligrams per liter for total nitrogen or 10 milligrams per liter for total nitrogen.
Thanks, Mary Beth.
Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Beth. Let's see, the next question is from Robert A. Johnson. Please understand the difference between total organic nitrogen versus nitrate and nitrite. Also total tidal nitrogen. I'm not hearing an understanding of control limits to outcomes. Who would like to take that one on? If you understand the question. Do you understand the question?
I think it's a comment and it stands on its own.
Yeah. If there's a question, Mr. Johnson, please follow up with a clarifying question in the chat. That would be really helpful.
So I can just one part of that, the different
Sure.
components of nitrogen that Mr. Johnson is speaking to. The alternative systems are demonstrating performance of total nitrogen, and we define total nitrogen as nitrite and nitrate and TKN, which is the total Gildan nitrogen component, both organic and ammonia. So it's all of it together in terms of the performance and the total nitrogen value.
Thank you. Let's see. The next question is from Andrew Gottlieb. Did DEP senior managers personally visit Cape municipalities prior to releasing these regulations to brief select boards and their staff and to seek comment and input prior to releasing the proposals? Weldon? Or Millie? How about Millie? Millie, you should answer this one.
Thank you. So our engagement has been longstanding, albeit not as up until the point when we formally released the documents for our announcement. We had a letter from then Commissioner Suberg that was issued signaling to all the communities that we were very much interested in meeting with every single community that could be subject to these proposed regulations. We held numerous meetings, equating to over 50 meetings during the course of the entire summertime. But I also want to harken back to prior to June 2nd, when then Commissioner Suberg released a letter alerting the communities that MassDEP was looking for full engagement. Our Southeast region, in combination also with Boston staff, we've been working hand in hand with all the communities through the wastewater program more robustly, as I pointed, starting back in 2015 by way of organizing ideas and soliciting ideas. And actually, again, the 4 communities that are within the Pleasant Bay jurisdiction, they raised their hand and we followed through with working with them robustly. In addition to also presenting every year at the One Cape Summit, that's been a longstanding tradition, MassDEP engaging with all of the communities, 30 communities and 52 watersheds across the Cape Islands, and more recently, as of late, across the board in Buzzards Bay communities.
Thanks, Millie. Yeah, a number of us spent the large part of the summer working with Millie and her staff in the Southeast Regional Office, visiting, in some cases on more than one occasion, with representatives of municipalities, boards of health, and other related organizations and people, stakeholders, people who have interests and concerns. We spent a lot of time working with communities over the summer and really into the early fall. The next question is from anonymous attendee. Please explain how living organisms will be able to thrive with absolutely zero nitrogen. I think that's a misunderstanding of the regulations and the intent of the regulations. We're not seeking the regulations don't seek to have zero nitrogen in embayments and estuaries. They seek to have a healthy amount of nitrogen in embayments and estuaries. And the healthy amount is determined by the studies I mentioned previously that analyze that specific water body and determine what a healthy amount of nitrogen should be. And so the goal is, as set forth in the TMDLs, the MEP reports, and scientific evaluations, is to reduce nitrogen in that watershed to a point necessary to achieve a healthy concentration of nitrogen in the embayment or watershed. It's a good question, and that is absolutely not our goal. That would be moving in the wrong direction. Let's see. Jim Witten asks, I am from Westport. Oh, I just lost his question. I am from Westport. At least half of our west branch of the Westport River sub-watershed is located in Rhode Island. How are you going to facilitate that mitigation? That is a legal question and a policy question, and this is a public information session, and that doesn't relate to the regulations as they currently exist. And because we're in a public comment period, and this is the purpose of this is for clarifying questions, I'm going to defer this till after the public comment period, unless somebody feels like they know how to address this question. But
yeah, Tim, I think that there is a way to help address this, which is to be clear that municipalities are responsible for the, if they file a watershed permit application, then the municipality would be responsible only for the portion of the contribution coming from their part of the watershed. So that part that's outside of the Massachusetts boundary in Rhode Island, we don't have a way to do that. That would really be between probably EPA and the state of Rhode Island, I guess, to try and address their nitrogen sources if they're contributing to a water quality impairment.
Thanks, Love. The next question is from Gerald Bellistock. Millie, I'm going to ask you to follow up on this one. Earlier this evening, you mentioned that 4 communities at the elbow of the Cape have already put watershed plans into effect: Harwich, Chatham, Orleans, and Brewster. Can you tell us about any of the details in these towns' plans, or do you know how I might go about learning these details? I'll first say that and then I'll go to Millie, but it's another plug for the website or the webpage. There is information on the webpage about the joint permit that these communities have entered. And so you can actually look at the permit and find out more about it there. But Millie, do you want to add on to the answer?
You beat me to the punch, Tim, and absolutely. We have posted the actual watershed permit. It's available on the website. It provides a lot of the information that basically serve to define the parameters for what we were looking for, MassDEP as well as the municipalities. There's a lot of information that also resides with the towns themselves. But just to advance to you that this year in the fall of 2023, the 5th anniversary of that permit will take root. And as part of the proposal that MassDEP is trying to solidify through this process, we're looking to have annual reports that start telling the story with regards to how well these proposals are performing. And so these 4 communities have a combination of, again, both traditional, non-traditionals, and we would love to talk to you. Give us a call at MassDEP. We can further provide you with more information. But in the meantime, again, in the interest of ensuring that it's we're working within the bounds of this public informational session, please consult the website. There's a lot of information that's contained in there.
Jim Witten has a question. He says, if the IA systems and the testing prove to 11 and 10 micrograms per liter, then are all the others approved for general use, but only get 19 milligrams per liter not okay? Mary Beth, do you understand the question and you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so it wouldn't be that, well, the other technologies with general use approval, if they were at 19 and 25, those are still viable technologies to be utilized for drinking water protection areas. But if there was a general use technology that had a better performance, then that would be the best available nitrogen reducing technology. And that would be, or they would be, if there's more than one, what could be utilized for the natural resource area, nitrogen sensitive area.
Okay, thanks, Mary Beth. All right, I'm not seeing at this point any other questions that seek clarification, have questions pertaining to clarification of the draft regulations at this point. And so I think it appears we're out of questions at this point, and it is 8 o'clock. So we'll make a last call for questions seeking clarification of the regulations. And I want to also note that, hold on. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, thus far, we have not seen a question come from the person who needed Portuguese interpretive assistance earlier. So I'm going to ask Isabella at this point to ask that in Portuguese, just to make sure that the individual doesn't have a question. If you could do that, Isabella, I'd really appreciate it.
Yes, of course. Então, a pessoa que pediu interpretação em português, se nesse momento tiver alguma pergunta sobre o que foi apresentado em inglês, por favor, pode se manifestar e eu farei a tradução.
And we'll wait a minute for that person to...
Vamos aguardar um minuto para a pessoa fazer a pergunta e eu posso traduzir.
Tori, are you seeing any questions coming through?
I see no new questions and no raised hands.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you, Isabella. Much appreciated.
Very welcome.
Okay. Well, we will close the information session then. It's 8:05 on January 17th, 2023. I want to thank everyone who participated tonight. Our goal is to, and our objective is to clarify these regulations as much as we possibly can, and we hope we moved in a positive direction with that tonight. And I feel like I can't do it enough, but I want to make another plug for our webpage. Please go to that webpage and please sit down and spend some time going through it. It has a lot of information about what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it, and what you could expect from the draft regulations as they're currently drafted. And follow up with questions or comments. And I encourage you to follow up with comments at the email address we sent out previously, and also in the public hearings we have next week. One scheduled for January 24th and one scheduled for January 25th. And that's the forum in which you can make verbal public comments that go into the official record, or as I said, you can submit those in writing at dep.talks@mass.gov. And then we're having another information session tomorrow night. It's a hybrid session, so you can participate remotely or in person at UMass Dartmouth at 6 o'clock in the, I'm forgetting the room right now, but it's on our website.
The marketplace, I
The
believe.
marketplace.
Yeah.
The marketplace, that's correct, at UMass Dartmouth.
And Tim, Mr. Kirk has asked a question in the chat, and I can't answer that question. I don't know if Mary Beth or one of the others are capable of answering that question. So I just want to call your attention to that.
Mr. Kirk asks, may present Title V's be adapted with addition of IA permeable barrier aeration chambers? Mary Beth, you want to tackle that one?
So for any alternative technology, it would have to go through the process of a Title V review. But the permeable barrier, and I'm assuming that's the same as the permeable reactive barrier, is not a component of a septic system. So it wouldn't necessarily fall under that review as an alternative septic system. But they are being utilized in part can be incorporated in a comprehensive plan and utilized under a watershed permit. They are viable technology under that aspect, but they would not be included with Title V. And Mr. Kirk, I just have to let you know it's a 5, not a V. I apologize, but it matters. V is referring to air quality regs, just FYI. So yeah, so the permeable reactive barrier would not be approved as an alternative septic system, but it can be utilized as an alternative system under a CWMP.
And some municipalities are in fact using permeable reactive barriers, and the best part of that is that they have been successful in applying for free money through the federal government, the SNEP program. The majority of the areas that we're talking about that are impacted directly by this proposal, the majority of them are within the jurisdiction of the EPA SNEP program. And we have been seeing some success with the installation of PRBs to address nitrogen, and in some cases, I believe, some other ancillary contaminants that are in the water column.
Yeah, and I would add to Millie's answer that the funding sources that she was talking about are identified, and there's more information about them on our webpage. Several funding sources that communities can avail themselves of to help receive and implement a watershed permit for their community. Okay, thank you for the last
and Tim,
question. Gerard.
To clarify on the location for tomorrow night, it is in the marketplace and it's on the 2nd floor.
Thank you.
So just so folks aren't wandering around.
Great.
Go upstairs. Okay.
Thank you, Gerard.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your participation. It's helpful to have this exchange for us and hopefully for you as well. Have a good night. Bye.
Bye all.